Ich glaube, wenn man startet, dann kommen die rein, dann hören sie das.
1, 2, 1, 2. So, haben wir hier schon Sound? Ja? Nee, die wollen unten sitzen bleiben gerade. Ja. So, good afternoon. There are some spare seats left, but I think we should start, otherwise we are running out of time. I'm very happy that we could start now in the afternoon with our symposium. My name is Stefan Zipfel. I'm the Vice Dean of the Medical Faculty and the head of the medical school. And together with the PIs of our health hub, Luciano Sasso and Francesco Panese, and together with my colleague Bernhard Hirt, we just want to start this afternoon giving you a very brief introduction how particularly Tübingen is organized as a medical faculty. And so if I can get my slides. Yep, okay. So in the next few minutes, I will just give you a very brief overview about Tübingen, but just for those of you, some students are also around, I just want to acknowledge the colleagues here, which are from the other 10 universities listed on this slide. And you see that most of them are universities much bigger than we are, capital universities, and we are very happy as Tübingen to be part of the CIVIS consortium. When I say we, then going back in time, Tübingen was founded in 1477. And just as giving you a brief idea what was it about in 1477, some of the other dates around that time, and jumping in time to the actual situation at the medical faculty, you can see here that we do have around 4,600 students all in all. We are running not only 15, but we have just started to run the 16th study program. We do have about 500 graduates each year, and due to the fact that we do have a clear partnership with the university hospital, we have partners, and most of them, of the physicians, are part of the university hospital and also at the medical faculty. So we do have more than 2,600 medical doctors, physicians and scientists. And you see that there are a lot of laboratories, nearly 1,000, and all in all there are 123 officially appointed professors. And if we just look to the research fields of the Faculty of Medicine, then if I would ask the Dean of our faculty, Bernd Pichler, then he would definitely start with the oncology field. And at the moment, the oncology field is also very successful, also due to the fact that we do have a cluster of excellence here, the so-called IFID cluster. Besides that, there's a huge area in neuroscience, and also in infectious medicine, and all of these areas run or are involved in an excellence cluster initiative. Besides that, there's a bit of a smaller area, that's diabetes and vascular medicine, as a research topic at our medical faculty. And you can see on the left-hand side that although Tübingen is a relatively small city, we do have a lot of partners here also. It's not only the university and the university hospital, but it's also the so-called Cyber Valley. It's the Fraunhofer, it's the Helmholtz, it's Max Planck, it's Leibniz. So these are all national institutions, and besides that, we also have a number of major industrial partners. And on the next slide, this, if we break it down, then you can see here our study programs, and you can see also that we do have the classical, the typical medicine as human medicine, dentistry, but we have also started with a PhD program in experimental medicine. Our second, and that's more or less also the youngest column of our programs, is the so-called health sciences, starting with midwifery, nursing, physiotherapy, and one of the latest courses and programs are in population-based medicine. We will hear later. And our third column is about biomedicine, starting with molecular medicine, medical technology, also all as a bachelor and a master's program. And besides that, we do run together with the neighbor faculty, the science faculty, the neuroscience programs as master programs, as international master's programs, also together with the Max Planck Institute. If we look at the numbers, then you can see here the development of the student program. And if I would have extended this graph to the last 20 years, then you would see that we have now more than doubled the numbers of our students. And also, with 16 programs, we are the medical faculty, not only in our state, Baden-Württemberg, but in the whole country, in Germany, which is responsible for the most programs related to health, but also related to life sciences. Again, the numbers of students. And I'm not really a friend of rankings, but some rankings are in favor of us, so I use this one. And there were just some very recent ones. The Times High Ranking, the university was ranked as 86th place, and this is exactly the place also for medicine. And if you look into the ranking of the German universities, then Tübingen is in the Times Higher ranking at position 6. Just about 2 weeks ago, the so-called CHE ranking in medicine was launched, and it displayed Tübingen at the 3rd position. That's particularly important because, as you know, we have a big but not the biggest program in Germany. There are other programs much bigger because they do have larger institutions like the Charité or also Munich. So we are pretty proud also for this ranking. But we already thought what is typical for Tübingen, and so more than or about 10 years ago we had a retreat, and we, together with students, we were interested to think what is special in Tübingen. And so we had 2 days and thought about that, and we came up with Spirit. And Spirit is still our typical DNA, and it's about student orientation, it's about practice orientation, and particularly today, it's international, and it's research-driven, and it's not only in Tübingen, because it changed over the years, because the IT is not nowadays also IT in terms of part of the Cyber Valley, but it's also interprofessional. So it stands for different developments over the last years. And if we come to the CIVIS partner universities, then it's we just had our meeting this morning, and it was very vital meeting, saying and showing that there are developments of joint programs, and in addition to that, that there are a lot, not only summer courses, but also blended programs. And just to give you a brief idea, and some of the pictures are reflecting this initiative where we are very proud being part of. Now I'm coming to this afternoon program, and I'm particularly proud that we as Tübingen could show you some of our highlights, very recent highlights, and I'm happy to announce our first speaker. It's Professor Carsten Eickhoff. We met each other last year at Brown University, where he has been there for the last 5 years, I guess, or so. And we are very happy that we were able to bring him and to convince him coming back to Germany. And we just have a brief talk and before our presentation this afternoon, and Carsten told me that it's his third or fourth presentation this week. So, and that's part of the interest and also the very interesting finding he is hired for. It's about artificial intelligence, and Carsten, we are very much looking forward to your talk, giving us a brief idea about artificial intelligence in future medicine. Das ist zu lang.
Ich nehme über dieses bisschen. Oh, we start with the discussion. Awesome. All right. Is this on? Can everyone hear me all right? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm very excited to speak with you all. And as Stefan said in his kind introduction, we're going to look a bit into AI in a possible future medicine. I guess this is probably the most buzzword-laden topic on the market right now, so bear with me. We'll try to cut through some of that and look at a few possible interpretations of what AI might do for us or against us in the next few years, next few decades. Really briefly, I come from a computer science background, so everything I know about medicine is second or third hand knowledge, so again, have some patience with me there. What I do know a lot more about is natural language processing or information retrieval, so how to deal especially with textual information at very large scale and how to make machines understand large amounts of human written, hopefully, text. Or even nowadays, if you look at things like ChatGPT, how to generate text via machines. And while this might appear toy or somewhat populist in some ways, it's a very interesting and very powerful set of techniques that we can use also in the health domain. And then in terms of my research interests, I'm especially excited when these techniques of natural language processing or information retrieval, which is the mathematics underlying search engines, when that comes to bear on health, either on the clinical or consumer health side. And a lot of the work in my lab looks at how to fundamentally, somewhat irrespective of health, improve these methods. So how do we build the next ChatGPT? How to make sure it hallucinates less and just doesn't just make up things, but bases itself in facts? How do we make sure it's not racist or sexist? How do we make sure that it can cite its sources when generating text? So all of these very fundamental questions that are crucial for health, but generalized to all kinds of other questions and applications, are what we deal with day to day. And then, and this is sort of the bottom here of this list of topics, we try to apply these techniques or develop them such that we can use them in health decision making. And very often this will have the flavor of, given some information, maybe about a patient, and given a very large repository of knowledge, maybe all the knowledge of humankind as we have it on the internet, for example, can I make better decisions here? So can I propose a better diagnosis? This is an example that I want to look at today, is diagnostic decision support. But it could be therapeutic, it could be doctor-patient interactions, or bot-patient interactions, or bot-doctor interactions, or what have you. So all of these things. And this can then take concrete form. So one project that's going on still with colleagues at Brown in the US, for example, is the automatic detection of child abuse. Right? And this is not just an important public health topic, but it's also a topic that is exciting from a machine learning point of view because it's hard, because where usually, if we want to spot tumors in images, right, nobody will lie to you. They will tell you, I believe this is where the tumor is, right? And there may be some margin of error, but otherwise that's what it is. In this domain here, the potential perpetrator who may have abused a child is the one who gives you the story. So they are the ones who say, well, child fell off the stairs or whatever. And we now embark on this detective work of finding out where's our ground truth, actually a ground lie, and we have to work against that, right? So we have to really try to work multimodally, see does the mechanics of a fracture work with the story of what allegedly happened, and things like that. So that's one example of what we can do with these things. More generally, today I want to look a bit at diagnostic decision support and in particular diagnostic errors. And many of you who are much more first-hand involved with the medical system will know better than I what the impact of diagnostic errors are. For the rest of us who are medical lay people, the idea here is that the diagnosis ideally comes at the very beginning of the clinical pipeline. So someone presents with symptoms or complaints, we hopefully make a diagnosis and can then embark on this journey towards treatment. Now, if we get the starting point wrong, chances are we will mistreat the patient, right? We will treat for the wrong thing, and for some treatments, they might have side effects, they might be toxic, so treating for a wrong condition is a problem. And we see here on this slide, and these numbers are US only, right? So this is really only in the States where we see that a whole lot of outpatient visits, 10% of in-hospital deaths, 12% of hospital adverse events, a whole number of absolute deaths per year result from some form of diagnostic errors. And I think the most important thing here, sort of the least prominently displayed fact on this slide, is at the very bottom. Nearly every person will in their lifetime, and this is again developed world, right? So we're not even talking developing world, will experience at least one diagnostic error in their lives. So all of you in expectation will at some point have to deal with diagnostic errors. And this might be mundane small stuff, or it might be life-threatening. And this is where we try to go in here and we try to help. So we try to help physicians make better diagnostic decisions so that we have these nice trickle-down effects of correct diagnosis translates to quicker treatment. Okay, so we could now, as technologists, so my camp, say, oh, but really, medicine, how hard can that be, right? So we take some data, we represent our data in terms of features and labels, we throw some fancy neural networks at it, and then we publish a paper like all of these good things here, where we say that diagnosis of Alzheimer's or sepsis or diabetic retinopathy or what have you can be done at nearly perfect accuracy. Now, I'm not innocent of this, so some of these papers I was involved with, but what these papers usually do not communicate is this part here, right? It's the cohort size. So the first thing is we have loads and loads of data, and these levels of accuracy we'll only get if we have thousands of historic cases. The other thing that's Somewhat hidden in these papers is that we are looking at one concrete disease, so Alzheimer's versus nothing versus healthy, or sepsis versus nothing, or versus one other condition, right? So we are making these nice, very sterile binary decisions that are not necessarily what physicians face in reality, right? Physicians more face this idea of stomach ache, what now? So that where there's all kinds of explanations. And these settings where we have a large number of possible explanations, a large number of classes in machine learning speak, where some of these classes are well populated. Congestive heart failure, everyone has it. We've seen so many training examples, we can perfectly explain it. Or at the end of the spectrum, Kawasaki or something else, so some rare disease for which neither physicians nor machines have much training data in order to become accurate. This is a problem setting in which standard machine learning goes to die, right? So we like these problems of 10,000 images of dogs, 10,000 images of cats, distinguish dogs from cats, and never parrots. So this is a very, very different setting, and this is why there's a whole lot of advertisement and marketing around machine learning in medicine, but it's not always realistic medicine. I want to look at a concrete and this is actually the class distribution in a real hospital, for example. And it barely looks like a distribution, you can barely see it, right? So you have, at the very left, you have the very few heavy-hitting diseases, so this is your diabetes and your congestive heart failure and all that stuff. And you see this endlessly long tail of things that you observe only once, and this is 10 years of data in a Boston-based hospital. Okay, I want to look at a concrete case just to quickly motivate what's going on, what we're doing here. This is a real patient from the University Hospital Zurich, where someone presents with stomach ache and constipation. Okay, so we run some tests, we prescribe some light medication, symptoms don't go away after a while, so 4 months later, we notice anemia that we can't explain, and so on and so forth. So in this gap over here, the whole patient's system starts shutting down. Eyesight starts failing, kidneys are shutting down, so the patient is in actual danger at that point. And only almost 2 years in does someone run an extended blood panel and finds out that this person has highly elevated levels of lead in their blood, while they have no reason to be exposed to lead in the first place, right? So there was no professional or private occupational exposure to heavy metals. So nobody thought of it. So not a rare disease as such, so this is not some rare genetic syndrome, but it sort of has all the makings of this. And what we now try to do here is, can we do better? So the solution for this here was that this particular person was poisoning themselves accidentally. So they had imported tea from abroad, had taken that for years and years without symptoms until the levels of blood, of lead in the blood had accumulated to a dangerous level where they almost killed themselves over time. Okay, so what we want to do here now, and so this is a setting where supervised machine learning, where I train on all these millions and millions of cases of accidental tea-infused lead poisoning, right, there's exactly one of those guys, doesn't help us. So we need to do something else here. So what we are proposing to do here is to use search engines, much like Google on the web, for example. We just take the symptoms or whatever we know about the patient as a query, as our search terms, and we search PubMed because there's all kinds of good stuff published there, so probably our best shot at getting at medical knowledge. Okay, so this gives us a ranked list of abstracts on PubMed. And what we can do is we can mine from that terms that are dominant here, so possible diagnostic candidates, right? And we might get to the fact that maybe this, in this case, male patient even has menstrual pain. Not really a great suggestion, but it's an explanation. And somewhere deep down on this list, we'll also see lead poisoning as a possible explanation for stomach ache and constipation. Okay, that doesn't help us very much because this is somewhere around rank 200 maybe of our ranked list. What we do now is we do this for all episodic evidence that we see over time, right? So the anemia, same thing. So maybe you have a vitamin B deficiency, maybe it's really just fatigue. But again, somewhere deep down on this list, it will say lead poisoning. And we do this for all of these. And then we try and join this over this temporal domain where we say, what does consistently explain all the different symptoms we see over time? And now we get a cumulative ranking here on which lead poisoning is one of the top candidates suddenly. So this is something that we wouldn't have got with traditional machine learning. We wouldn't have got it with our physicians who spotted this only 2 years into the trajectory, and we can do this maybe at month 4 or 5 of the patient journey and hopefully intervene much faster. So that's the basic idea here. We ran these experiments at scale. We looked at 33 million PubMed abstracts. 50,000 people in this intensive care encounter list from, again, this Boston-based hospital. And interestingly, out of 2,600 different diagnoses, 900 of them we see exactly once in 10 years of a large hospital. So this shows some of the impact of these singleton diagnoses, right? So you could argue, oh, but that's rare, right? It never happens. It happens all the time. It's just different stuff that happens. Okay. If we look at the performance of this, orange here is our standard machine learning system. And horizontally, I show you the rarest to the more common diagnoses, right? So we get better as we have more training data. That makes sense. In green, I show you this search engine-based system that does somewhat well even here in this early setting where the supervised system has no chance. And in blue, and this is the interesting thing, is when we use evidence from both. So we devised a system that says, if it's a frequent diagnosis, I'll trust the supervised system, the orange bar here, because we already know a lot about congestive heart failure. If it's something rare, I trust the search-based system, and I sort of smoothly interpolate between both of these. And interestingly, even here in these very frequent cases, I get something that's better than either of the inputs before, right? So search here really helps us do well. And this is a very, very concrete case, right? And you could probably field many others, but I want to make a few points that I believe are crucial in AI in present and hopefully also future medicine. Humans, all of us, we scale poorly, like my colleagues in computer science would say, right? We take a moment to read 33 million papers. Right, so I can't, as a physician, talk with the patient, form an opinion, go away, read 33 million papers, and then say, well, yeah, now I know better. Right? So this is where machine learning and techniques like it come to play, help us scale better, make better decisions. In order to do so, we need data. We need also all of us want to do machine learning, AI, all those fancy buzzwordy things. But in order to get there, we need the data. So data integration, very, very dusty, boring 80s topics such as how to plug this database into that database so that we have a large database, suddenly become really important in training better and more accurate systems. And then as the bottom thing here, and I think this is where myself and my colleagues, and we all commit these big fallacies of throwing machine learning at anything, irrespective of the clinical pipeline in which the system is supposed to live. So I would strongly advocate for machine learning where it matters and only where it matters. Meaning, if you use after-the-fact information and then diagnose someone with information you wouldn't have had at the point of diagnostics, right? That's cute, and you might get really good numbers, but it is not realistic. It will not help anyone prospectively. And with these points, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention and look forward to a nice discussion later.
Thank you very much, Carsten. We thought we might have the discussion after all the presentations, so thank you. And we are coming to the next speaker. And the next speaker is my co-chair, Bernhard Hirt. He is the Dean of Studies of the Preclinical Courses and the head of anatomy, and we are very much looking forward to your talk because we know that you are an expert also not only in teaching but also in long-range teaching courses, and we will get hopefully an idea what you're doing in these courses.
Yeah, Stefan. So I use this microphones. Hopefully you hear me. Thank you very much. I would like to show you something about interactive digital inter-university teaching, and this deals, of course, with CIVIS Alliance and what we do and why we meet here. And I also would like to raise the question whether this interactive digital teaching is useful at all. So the question is how to effectively digitalize educational content, and the question is it possible and desirable to combine modern streaming formats and traditional teaching methods? So I would like to start with a question on you, and I'm facing now the students especially. Who's familiar with Twitch here in this room? Some of you, and of course, Carsten also is familiar. So Twitch is a platform which is really most fascinating. It was founded by a startup company in 2010 12, and after 2 years it was number 4 in internet traffic. And 2 years later it was sold to Amazon for almost $1 billion. So the participants watch experts in doing computer games, and the average age is 21 years. And here you also can see what you can find at Wikipedia, for instance, how many people watch them doing computer games. So if we look to the key factors, so this also is something dealing with teaching, of course. And if you look to the key factors why people are fascinated by Twitch, is they have experts, they show experts doing computer games, so they have hosts with expert knowledge. They use a lot of entertainment values, and there's a high degree of interactivity. And yes, it is also possible to go for education, and this is how it looks like. You see on the right side, so this is histology, anatomy. It's really great what can be done at Twitch. And you see a chat, how it is organized on the right side. So this is the way how interactive features are integrated here. So we also started to do something like that. Actually, we were 4 years earlier. So we started in 2008 with a platform called Sectio Chirurgica. And we ended up not with billions of people, but we have now 50,000 medical students to follow us from all universities in Germany at least, but now, of course, also from the CIVIS Alliance. So this now shows you the announcement of one of the of our lectures. So this actually was the announcement for partners from the CIVIS Alliance, and some of you might know this videos or this live videos we did. So we also have the same key factors, to be honest. We have experts, we invite surgeons to do surgery on our cadavers, so the human donors, the anatomical specimen. We add a lot of entertainment values. We virtually bring the anatomist into the abdomen during live surgery with a green screen studio, and there is a battle between the anatomist and the surgeon sometimes. And we have a high level of interactivity by chat, by quizzes and so on. This is what you can see. And something which is quite important is we have an additional value, and this is, Luciano, sorry, I did not ask you, and Monique Scher, I also did not ask you, but of course we connect and speak with all the different, oops, sorry, I was too active now. Speak with the different universities at the CIVIS Alliance. So the question now is it possible to tweak the level of interactivity? Do interdisciplinary lectures increase the learning effect? And does the learning effect differ between professions? So we did some research. We did it together with the Leibniz Institute for Wissensmedien, IWM, here in Tübingen, and also in our institute. So first, we did some tests about interactivity. We checked how you can influence the chat activity. So we had 2 studies there, and of course it is easy to manipulate the chat. So if you react on questions directly, the chat activity tremendously increases, or it's getting less. So we did also a follow-up, and we asked if the interaction also has an influence on the academic outcomes. And here I can say that yes, we had published, it is very helpful, but unfortunately not for the anatomical knowledge, but for the clinical knowledge. So I'm an anatomist, but still for the clinical knowledge, the sectio chirurgica, this type of transmissions are very, very significantly helpful. So we did research on the learning effect, and you can see we did this together with the psychologists of the EVM. And first we could see, as I told you, that the clinical knowledge significantly increases. And we just took episodes from the live transmissions, the surgical live transmissions, and the same lecturer was giving a very traditional lecture instead with the same time. And we did a lab environment and looked for the items that might be responsible for this gain of clinical knowledge. So we looked for the comprehensibility, the conceivability, and the entertainment. And by the tests and the correlation studies and so on that has been performed, we were quite surprised. It is not the content we show or the comprehensibility or something. It was the entertainment factor that was most important to increase the clinical knowledge. So this is just one aspect of several tests that had been performed in this lab situation. So then we looked for the interprofessional setting, and we thought sectio chirurgica videos or the live streaming is most successful when the protagonists of different professions are presented. And indeed, interprofessional transmissions lead to a higher entertainment. This is, of course, one point, and the other is also here better learning outcomes. And these are some datas here. There have been 2 groups of students in the lab conditions that were tested on their knowledge prior to watching sectio chirurgica and after. Students from the physiotherapy and students from the medical students. And here you can see how the medical knowledge increases. So I would like to come to the end. This was really a very short picture of what we did, and we can tell that the level of interactivity is increased. We do have a learning effect, and the interprofessional situation is helping a lot. So obviously it is also helpful to go with formats like that, digital live transmissions also with the inter-university aspect, and we are looking forward to going further in the cooperation with the CIVIS universities. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bernhard. It was great to get a bit of an insight into your teaching facilities, as we've done also this morning. And I can tell also the students who are also participating that they are invited also joining teams and being involved in your digital team. Okay, coming to our third speaker. It will be about population health, and it's Norbert Schmitz, who we were able to get to Tübingen from McGill University. And Norbert just started the master program of population-based medicine And I'm not only happy that you are here, Norbert, but I'm particularly happy that you're here together also with your students coming from very far countries to Tübingen and starting here their master's program in population-based medicine. And Norbert, we are looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for your kind introduction. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and I would like to invite you to a somewhat different journey after the first two presentations. So I would like to take an international perspective, and I would like to talk about multi-generational or intergenerational studies with a focus from population health perspective. So I think it's an important topic, and it's an area where we have already established some network within the CIVIS network. So what is population health or population health science? So it's about the study of conditions that shape distributions of health within and across populations, and about the mechanisms how health and disease are produced or developed over time. So it's not so much the focus on the individual patient, which is important, the individual for sure, but it's more taking the global perspective, community perspective, to see how health develops over time. So we are interested in prevention of disease, and the aim is really to get the healthiest possible populations. So that's one of the main aims of population health, public health. So when we look back a little bit in the past, so 20th century focus was really on behavior modification and individual responsibility for health. So the patient was or is responsible for his health. So, and the focus was to focus on individual factors, so to stop smoking and to be more active, but it was really focused on the individual factors. So what we now see in the 21st century, individual perspective is still very important, but also it's about the collective health of entire communities and populations. So which means the recognition and emphasis on social determinants of health. So it's not about the individual, which is important for sure, but it's also about the environment, community, neighborhood, network where people live and how this works together. So we now have still a more advanced understanding how the different factors work together. So, for example, when we look at mental health, depression, anxiety, stress, and chronic conditions, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, heart disease, so they are related and connected in some way, and there are a lot of factors that influence this relationship. We have behavioral factors like activity, smoking. We have biological factors, we have social factors, we have culture, environment, individual factors. So those are really important to better understand how health and conditions are produced in individuals and in communities. So we all know social behavior is learned by observing and imitating behavior of others. So we know this from children. Children learn by observing and imitating adults, and it's still valid for adults. So it's the environment, the neighborhood is really important. People observe what other people are doing within the network, within families, and to get some information about behavior, social behavior, and health behavior. So, and we know if we tell someone to stop or suggest to stop smoking, and this person lives in an environment where everybody smokes, so where all the friends smoke, where the family smokes, so it's really difficult for this person to stop smoking if we don't take the neighborhood, the environment into account. So the environment is a very important aspect when it comes to health and health-related outcomes. So we really have to take some what we call a multi-level eco-social perspective, where the individual is very important, but the structure around the family, social network, neighborhood, city, state, country, globally is very important. Just to show you one example, one of the famous papers published a couple of years in the New England Journal of Medicine about the Framingham study. So it was about the spread of obesity in social networks. So they took the Framingham study with more than 10,000 people over 30 years. And what they were able to identify, there were some obesity clusters. So people, social networks, people clustered, and obesity was transmitted within those networks. And what I concluded, and what I think very interesting still nowadays, a person's chance of becoming obese increased by 57% when he or she had a friend who became obese. So it's had a friend. So it's not about family, so obesity running in the family, genetic factors, and so on. Here it was really when there was a friend who became obese, so there was a high increased risk that the person became obese too. So those networks are really very important. And we see from other areas like neighborhood affects health, so the area where people live is very important. So there's a lot of research now on disadvantaged neighborhood associated with increased incidence of cardiovascular disease, even if you control for income, education, occupation. So it's the environment. If its environment is very stressful, if people experience a high level of stress, or if there's a lot of noise, pollution, crime, so this really affects behavior and health outcomes. There was a couple of years ago, also published in the New England Journal, interesting social experiment, randomized social experiment, where people were moved with some voucher from disadvantaged, from poor neighborhoods to advantaged neighborhoods. So income and occupation didn't change, just people were moved from disadvantaged to more advantaged neighborhoods. And so they observed a decrease in obesity and diabetes. Everything else did not change, so it was just the movement, it was a randomized trial, so just the movement from disadvantaged neighborhood to advantaged neighborhood, which had an impact on health outcomes. So we see this in social networks, in neighborhood, and it might be even stronger when we look at families, so where children spend a lot of time growing up in those environments. So it's really an important topic in intergenerational studies to see how health and illness are transmitted across generations. So we know anecdotally a lot of people who had family history have a higher risk, and so this is well known. But the mechanisms are still not clear. Genetic factors play a role for sure, but it's not only genetics which is important. There are probably a lot of other factors that are important at the same time. So still little is known about the mechanisms, but it's important to understand the role of adversity, psychosocial and biological factors, and their interaction in the intergenerational transmission of health and health problems. So we know very well from the area, mental health, parental depression is one of the most robustly established risk factors for child and adolescent psychopathology. And so there's ongoing discussion for other areas, so intergenerational diabetes and obesity, a cycle to break. Probably here with a question mark, but I think it is a cycle to break, and it's very important to break this cycle in intergenerational transmission. We know stress can be transmitted across generations via epigenetic change, so it's not about only behavior and social factors, it's really about the interaction of genetic, biological, and behavioral factors, which is very important. Just to give you another example from some research we are doing with type 2 diabetes. So we know from family aggregation studies, heritability of type 2 diabetes, approximately 25%, so a higher risk within the families if one of the parents has been diagnosed with diabetes. But so far it seems genetic variants only explain 10% of the disease heritability, so it seems there are a lot of other factors that are important from shared behaviors and shared environmental factors. So in case of diabetes, it makes sense if parents have a poor lifestyle, if obesity is an important issue, as I said before, so children will learn and adapt some of the behaviors and use them themselves later on. So parental depression, mental health might play an important role in the intergenerational transmission of type 2 diabetes. And what we need is some conceptual models, what we think, how can we model this, or what are the relationship between the different factors. So one way is that parental diabetes and parental mental health problems, depression or mental health problems, so might increase the risk of metabolic dysregulation in children and adolescents, might be some stress exposure for children and adolescents, or result in unhealthy lifestyle behaviors or mental health problems, so which in turn can increase the risk for the children to develop type 2 diabetes in adulthood. So genetic factors are also important to consider in those models, and there are parental psychosocial factors, lifestyle, neighborhood environment, and biological factors, which are also involved in this process. And it's very likely there's not only one pathway, there are different pathways how the transmission happens, and both different pathways can work at the same time, so simultaneously in the development of diabetes here in offspring. So we're doing this study in collaboration with a Dutch study in Groningen, with the Lifeline study, one of the very few really intergenerational studies around the world. So it's a study with 160,000 participants with 3 or 4 generations now, which are followed longitudinally. And so here we are interested in transmission of type 2 diabetes. So one interest is about the risk factors. So who is at risk? When are children at risk to develop diabetes themselves? But that's only one side of the coin. So we have to look at the other side about resilience or coping strategies. So what protects people, children, to stay healthy, to not develop poor health outcomes, even if they grow up in an environment where, a disadvantaged environment or family where both parents had an unhealthy lifestyle or whether some other health issues. So what are resilience strategies or coping strategies that help those children to stay in, have a healthy life? So some kind of collaboration and some international collaboration with colleagues from Canada, Ireland, the Netherlands, and Germany. And so what we're doing, very briefly, looks a little bit crowded, but what we're doing, we have 9,000 participants, young participants, means age 40 to 55, who are at risk, or at some point at risk of developing diabetes, but we also have family members included, parents, mother and father, so we can follow this cohort longitudinally. We have biomarkers and a lot of information about family perception, family climate, and important information about family life, so that we can come up with some modeling and test our models, what we have in mind, to see if this works or if there's potential pathways. So what we see so far is parental type 2 diabetes and depression history increase the risk of depression and chronic stress in offspring, which in turn increase the risk of type 2 diabetes in offspring, meaning there's some mediating, some explaining effect here in this case. And high stress resilience in offspring seems to have some protecting effect. So we're doing this in the Netherlands, but we also have some replication studies or related studies going on in Canada. So in Canada, we have the Canadian Partnership for Tomorrow's Health, one of the largest population health studies in Canada with more than 300,000 participants in different provinces, so which offers a unique opportunity to replicate results and evaluate our model. So we're also doing some research here in Tübingen, what we call a Fit Life study. It's a pilot study where we're interested in intergenerational transmission of health. So we have a random sample recruited from the community, elderly people aged 70 to 85 years from the Tübingen area. So we did home visits, interviewed them, and we're recruiting children and grandchildren. So as a pilot study to see how this works. And the idea of the study is really to come up with a catchment area study here in the region, that we have a couple of thousand participants as a prospective study to see how health behavior is transmitted, but also what are coping strategies and what are resilience strategies in the community. And another very important aspect. So we're also working on those intergeneration studies within the CIVIS network. So we started last year setting up a team or a group of people interested in this kind of topic. And built what we called Health Across Generations, a CIVIS network. So we had participants from all CIVIS partner sites. I think Lausanne was not involved last year, but we hope we can get some people interested in this area. And we had our face-to-face meeting last year in Tübingen, and from now we have regular meetings, more online meetings, but we're trying to meet face-to-face from time to time. So it's a long mission statement. That was the agreement after 12 partners were involved to find the right wording. But it's about health across the generations, to understand patterns of health and illness across generations of individuals related by genetic, cultural, and psychosocial bonds, and to develop public health approach for the intergenerational context, which may foster the well-being of individuals, address inequalities, and help reduce the burden of disease. So it's really about intergenerational transmission of chronic conditions, health behavior, stress management, coping styles, resilience. And it's very important for us to have this kind of network, because what we really need, what we have to do is we need to complementary studies in this area with different aspects, different focus. For example, we need studies where we start with children, recruit children, and then invite parents and grandparents. But usually this takes a lot of time to see when children grow up and to observe intergenerational transmission. So it's one strategy. Another strategy, what we're doing here in Tübingen, we start on the other side. We start with grandparents, with elderly people, recruiting elderly people and inviting their children and grandchildren to participate in the network, in the study. And for others, it's important to start with parents and invite children and grandchildren to participate, to get a better understanding how those factors are associated over time. And we're also working with administrative data from some countries, like Scandinavian countries, Sweden, where we have a lot of administrative data, and with existing cohorts like the Lifelines or the UK Bristol Avon longitudinal study or Wisconsin study in the US. So we're trying to work in this network on different perspectives, using original data, but also using existing data to get a better understanding about the interrelationships. So you might ask, so it looks nice, but why are we doing this? Because we're having fun doing research? Of course we have fun doing research, but that's not the main issue. So when we look at the WHO agenda targets of sustainable development, goal 3, by 2030, reduced by 1/3 premature mortality from non-communicable diseases through prevention and treatment, and promote mental health and well-being. But it's very clear that we will not reach this goal, or WHO or we will not reach this goal. So what we really need is innovative designs and methods, approaches using big data, using smartphone technology, using digital phenotyping and comprehensive designs. And we also need the good knowledge about conceptual models and framework. So what we need is really to understand the mechanism and to develop interventions, prevention strategy, intervention strategy, so that we can improve health of individuals and offspring. And that's it. Thank you very much.
So, thank you. Thank you, Norbert. It was very interesting to see how important population-based medicine is and will be in future. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure now to announce Professor Maurizio Avendano, and he is from the University Center for General Practice and Public Health at the University of Lausanne. So Maurizio, perhaps you know your presentation. Thank you.
Does that work?
Here we are.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present here. I'm a professor at the University of Lausanne, and I work at the Institute of Public Health and Primary Care. Today I would like to, it's really interesting to hear about healthcare and the applications of technology as well. And I thought it would be good, maybe as follow-up of the previous lecture too, to think about, even outside of population health, how can we go beyond healthcare and think about all the policies that are outside of the healthcare system that might impact health. So I wanted to start with a topic that I've been doing some research on, which is the fact that life expectancy differs dramatically across different countries. If you're born in Japan at the age of 65 and you reach the age of 65, you can expect somewhere around 24 years more on average. So if you look at France, then it's also a country that has experienced a lot of increases in life expectancy. This is Switzerland, this is Sweden, this is Great Britain, and it's quite interesting that the United States actually has the lowest life expectancy of all OECD countries at age 65, particularly for women, and that's a large difference. It's a difference of 3.8 years, for example, between Japan and the US. Which actually suggests that the US is lagging somewhere of a half a century before Japan in terms of life expectancy. Not trying to look the US look bad, but once in a while it's okay to do that, I guess. And then, so, this is a topic on which I've done quite a lot of research myself, but most of the research that is done on this area is focusing on the healthcare system. Perhaps some of you know the Commonwealth Fund that compares health systems across the world and ranks them. And it does suggest that the US performs perhaps less good, not so good as other kind of high-income countries with a already high-performing health system. Germany is somewhere in the average of these 10 countries that you see here. But then it's paradoxical because the US, as you know, invests much more and has experienced much faster increases in how much they spend in healthcare at the moment, spending a really large part of their GDP. And paradoxically, there is a very weak relationship on how much countries spend on their healthcare systems and their life expectancy or their performance as a health system. So really what I want to sort of emphasize today is this idea that perhaps even though healthcare is, I'm sure, very important, there's also some elements outside of the healthcare system that are also part of policy. So this is what I call social policy. And just to give you an example here, we see, for example, that this is just a correlation, just to show you that countries that invest more, for example, in education tend also to have higher life expectancy. So really strong correlation with education policy expenditure, family expenditures, things like old age expenditures. So these are just correlations that are not causation, but they sort of suggest that perhaps there is something around the policy environment outside of the healthcare system that might be important to understand cross-national differences in health, and particularly why some countries like the US perform relatively poorly in health indicators. So how do we think about this idea that social policies impact health? So the basic idea is that health policies represent only a small fraction of all policies that shape what we call the determinants of health. Things like work conditions, social networks, environmental exposures, but also behavioral decisions like physical activity, diet, smoking. Many of these things are actually shaped by policies outside of the healthcare system. And so the key question that some of us sort of are interested about and that I focus on today is this question of how do these social policies in these different areas actually impact health? So there is a really new kind of avenue of research over especially the last 10 to 15 years that has at least suggested that some of these areas of policy are important to people's health. So many of the policies that shape early childhood education, for example, are important for decisions on behavior, but also other stress-related exposures that lead to poorer health outcomes later in life. I myself do a lot of work looking at compulsory schooling laws, making it compulsory to go to school longer and how that influences the cognitive function and risk of dementia later in life. Labor market policies, family policy, poverty reduction, housing policies, etc. So these are different areas of policy in which we need to understand how they actually impact health. So I thought I would choose two examples just to illustrate a little bit what these studies that are done in this area show us. And I chose one which is really outside of medical care. So it's the idea of making transportation free. In the UK, a couple of years ago, the UK introduced what is called the free bus pass policy, which essentially makes it free for people who are 65 or 60 years, depending on the year. For all the people, it makes it free to actually travel on the bus. So you might wonder, well, why would making it free to travel on the bus might impact people's mental health or cognitive function? So you can think of different mechanisms. Maybe they are more likely to go to the doctor if they can take a bus for free. But actually, maybe they also, you can think of this as a kind of nudge, as a kind of incentive for people to be more socially engaged. So what we did is that we used data from a study which is a population study similar to the kind of studies presented in the previous talk, which is the English longitudinal study of aging, which follows people already for 20 years, and we link this to eligibility rules to the free bus pass historically. And so what do we find? The first thing that we find is that if you look just at the correlation, it's quite interesting that people who use public transport are actually less depressed. They have lower symptoms of depression than people who do not use public transport. It also turns out that there is a correlation between public transport use and cognition. If you use more public transport, you have higher cognitive scores. So don't worry if you don't use public transport. This is just a correlation. It's not a causal effect. And then we did this analysis, sort of exploiting this variation in the law, and found that if you become eligible for the free bus pass, obviously you're 7 percentage points more likely to use public transport. And actually, it turns out that this actually does reduce your depressive symptoms. And it also improves your cognitive function. Now, this is just to give you an idea. We do a little bit of more analysis and show that people who do actually have this incentive to use public transport end up seeing their children and friends more often, doing more volunteering, and being much more socially engaged, which actually turns out, at least appears to improve their mental and cognitive function. And the last sort of example that I wanted to share is a study that we did of a maybe topical discussion, looking at how pension reforms, which have nothing to do with health, actually might impact women's health. The UK is a very exceptional case in which the state pension age was increased by, for some women, reforms increased the state pension age from the age of 60 up to around the age of 66. So it means that a woman, all of a sudden, who maybe thought could retire at age 60, now can retire only 6 years later. And this is a very controversial issue in every country, the UK being no exception, and with many groups sort of raising sort of inequality questions around this. We were interested about how this policy may impact health through different mechanisms. But the first question you want to know, if you ask women to stay longer in the labor market, do they actually stay longer? And what we find here is that these policies are very effective to increase the labor supply of women. So we see that in the UK, around 50% of women of age 60 to 64 were in the labor market, and after the reform, that was 60%. So it's very effective to increase, no surprise, forcing people to stay longer in the labor market increases the labor supply. But what's interesting here that you see, maybe it's not so clear to see in this graph, but what it shows is that actually women who were asked or incentivized to stay longer in work ended up having higher levels of depressive symptoms as well. Now, I don't show you sort of results for other health outcomes, but we also find that for women in lower high demand and low controlled occupations, they also experience more physical functioning symptoms later in life. So this is this paradox in which a policy that makes a lot of sense economically and maybe also for other reasons actually end up harming women's mental health and perhaps some women's physical health. We also look at how this policy influences an area that is very important for the healthcare system, which is the long-term care system. And obviously, if women are staying longer in the labor markets, their time to provide for care for their parents or for somebody who needs care diminishes. So we looked at this, for example, and we find that women also who stayed longer in the labor markets diminish the amount of hours they spend caring for their own parents. And what we find, this is my last slide here, is that if I have to stay longer, if I'm a woman and have to stay longer in the labor market, actually in this intergenerational survey, my parents report that they actually received less help and that this help is actually not compensated by formal or any kind of private care. So something that affects one generation has an impact on the health of another generation on a policy that has initially nothing to do with health. Okay, so I hope this gives you a little bit of a view. Healthcare is obviously very important, as we've seen in these presentations today, but it's maybe only one. Some people may even argue maybe only a small part of all the causes that might influence health outcomes. Social policies are strong determinants of population health, but we very rarely think about how reforms of education, pension, transportation might actually lead to health outcomes. At the same time, some of these policies might sometimes have positive, sometimes negative effects. So things that might be good for the economy might be actually have a health cost. So we need to really do research to understand how these policies shape health. And I think also my hope is that understanding a little bit the social policy impacts on health may also help us to understand, for example, why some countries might have longer life expectancy and better health than other countries, or also social groups within these countries. Yeah, thank you very much.
So Mauricio, thank you very much for this most interesting data. You're very cruel to us speaking about public transport because we have a strike at...
No buses today, huh?
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So I would like to introduce to you Professor Anne Hermann-Werner. She is from the Medizinische Klinik Psychosomatische Medizin Psychotherapie at the University Clinic here in Tübingen, but she is also director of the Tübingen Institute of Medical Education, TIME.
I'm not sure if it works.
I think
now it
will
does.
start soon.
Brilliant. Okay, so hello and thanks for the invitation to give a talk on the future of medical education, no pain, no gain. And my agenda is pretty simple, so it's about the future and its implications, about the how, the what, and the why. So when we're thinking about the future of medical education, we should also think of the future of medicine, because inevitably the two are intertwined. And we've heard about AI earlier, but maybe you have things in mind like nanorobotics or genome editing. Every time I don't know really what to say, I look things up. And this time I went to the TED Talk page and had a look what they offer as a playlist for future in medicine. And as you can see, it's quite a mixture of different things, but they do have one thing in common. They are innovative. So future needs innovation, because otherwise it's just a simple reflection of the present or the past. And there was quite an interesting report in Nature Biotechnology contemplating whether we should integrate innovation as a core objective in medical training. And amongst other things, they were asking about 50 people, medical students, but also physicians and fellows, whether they consider themselves as an innovator. And as you can see, this does not seem to be an easy decision, because 1/3 said yeah, 1/3 said no, and the last third said, well, I don't know. So what makes innovation so hard to grab or so difficult? Well, innovation needs change, and that's where the issue starts. Let me take you on a mind journey, and I put you right here. Can you feel it? Quite nice, isn't it? Like the sun is shining, you can smell the sea, it's lovely. You've actually been there for quite a while, it's comfortable. I mean, admittedly, the sun chair, it's already a little old and it squeaks when you turn around, and every now and then it breaks down, but you do know how to repair it, so it's fine for you. And then I come along and tell you, hey, pack up your things and come with me up there. Let's walk up there, because I've heard that from there the view must be magnificent, and for good measures I throw in a new sun chair so that you don't have to repair it all the time. Hand to your hearts, who would follow me immediately? Thought so, no one. Why is that? Well, for change you need some sort of motivation, and it's really tedious to give up what you have and what you're accompanied to, and maybe even for something where you don't really know if it's better or not. So whenever we're talking about change, we're talking about people, because change is about people, and medical education is also about people. Ultimately about patients, either directly because you're training excellent physicians, or indirectly because you're producing outstanding researchers. But when we're looking at the medical faculty as such, it's about staff and about students. And the latter is what I want to have a look at, namely how, what, and why they learn. Starting with the how. In the past years, we've learned so much about adult learning styles and what is helpful and what is not. And so here you can see 6 principles. By the way, that's how motivated my employees are, because that was drawn by my deputy, the pictures. So you can see 6 pictures representing 6 concepts that foster effective learning, and we go through them step by step. So the first one is retrieval-based learning, saying that it's easier to learn things when you can connect the new knowledge to something that you already do know. The second principle is interleaving, which means that it makes more sense to look at the very same thing from different perspectives, overlapping concepts, rather than focusing on one thing alone and then the next thing alone and then the third thing alone. The third principle is metacognition. It's kind of a self-monitoring, asking yourself, where am I, where do I want to go, and what do I need to get from A to B? The fourth principle is spaced repetition, meaning that you will probably learn more effectively if you learn something, then wait a while, and then come back to it and repeat it. And this goes a little against the concept of binge learning that medical students sometimes like or have to do when an exam is coming up. The fifth principle is frequent testing, meaning that only if there's a regular assessment with the feedback that assessment implies will learning improve. This can be the whole scale of what we know about assessment. It can be a high stakes or a low stakes exam. It can be formative or summative. It can be driven by yourself or instructor given. It doesn't matter as long as it gives you feedback about where you are. And the final one is the concept of self-explanation, which means that when you're learning something, you should always ask yourself, why is this the case? And try to explain it not only to yourself, but also preferably to others who hopefully want to listen. So these 6 principles have been shown to be very effective in adult learning, but they also have another thing in common. And those who were able to get a seat in the first rows might have already read it, because the title of the publication behind it talks about lifelong learning. And that's something that is really important, because medical education is no longer about the transmission of information. It's about the transformation of learners, teaching them how to learn and do that for the rest of their lives. Admittedly, we have some other things that keep us busy with how students learn or what are concepts of learning that are important, like competency-based education, where we're talking about entrustable professional activities and workplace-based assessment. Then also technology-based teaching, particularly the very fancy flipped classroom concept, takes into account a lot of the things that I've been talking about beforehand, and collaborative forms of learning, so team-based learning. Okay, coming from the how, asking for the what. And that's quite hard, because that's a lot. So I will only show you a few examples, starting with one that you've probably already anticipated, so digital competencies. Because the world is getting more digital, not only medicine, but the whole world, we need to train people in how to navigate through this world. And just because you are digitally competent in your personal lives, does not automatically mean that you are professionally digitally competent. And this publication tried to get together long lists of the areas of knowledge, skills, and attitudes, what medical students should learn when it comes to digital competencies in healthcare. I've only brought the top 5 of each category, but you can already see that this reflects quite well what is going on in the medical world itself. When talking about digital things in education, we can't get around ChatGPT. It really shattered some people's views of how we teach and how we learn, but actually it's not that much a fuss about, because I like this Twitter post very much, saying, well, we had things before like that: calculators, search engines, Google Translate, Wikipedia, Photomath, ChatGPT. They disrupt traditional teaching, we adapt. Education evolves forward. Blocking them isn't the answer. Making education more relevant is. Because in the end, ChatGPT is just a tool like many other things, and I need to know when to use it and when to let it be. And students will have to wrestle rather with questions like humanity. So what sets us apart as humans? When should we use AI and when shouldn't we use AI? Questions of obsolescence, like what can I do that AI can't do, and how can I make sure that I'm not going to be replaced by AI? And questions of ethics. How can I use it in a fair, equitable, unbiased, and good way and make sure that I'm using it in an ethical way? And the same accounts for using it in teaching. I mean, it doesn't make sense to let people write text. ChatGPT can do that much better. But it's really important to make use of collaborative learning and discussions about what this tool can do and about the issues, and spend the time together to discuss complex problems, things that maybe not today, I'm looking at Carsten, probably in a few years, but right now AI can't do as well as we can do it. Another issue is simulated environments. They will stay, and it was really interesting to see this review come out that highlighted how mannequins evolved in the area of emergency training. And you can see that surprisingly, part-task trainers were already there in the 1950s, and the forced computer patients, I mean, quite simple when we look at it now, but were already there in the 1960s. Now and in the future, this will evolve. We have computers that we can talk to and practice communication skills. We have virtual environments in which we can talk to virtual patients or interact with them. But the basic features will stay, like it's a protected environment, it is for deliberate practice, and you get immediate feedback. The last area I want to highlight as content is interprofessional education. This is from the WHO, and there are a lot of collaborations spending a lot of time thinking about what interprofessional education means and why do they do it? Well, collaboration saves time, money, and in the healthcare system, lives. What I really like, as a side note, is that the core competencies that have been defined in 2016 have been overworked now for 2023. And the main change is that they changed the word individuals of other professions to team members. So it's quite interesting to see that in 2016, although it was already about collaboration, it was individuals working together, whereas now even those competency concepts have understood that it is actually about the team. So I could go on for ages with topics that may be hot topics in the next years or decades. However, I think it would be quite audacious to think that I know what will be relevant in 30 years' time. I have no idea. So I think for me, it's more important that medical students of today have soft skills as competencies. This was a report, and it highlighted which kind of competencies are needed over time from 1960 till 2009, and you can see that the two lines above that really get more and more important are analytical and interpersonal skills. And that's what I think is about, like interpersonal and intrapersonal competencies, things like a frustration tolerance, a passion to improve, flexibility, and that's really important, self-reflectivity. And this is really important because that goes along with the resilience. And because I'm not only a medical educationalist, but also a psychotherapist, I just want to mention that stress and self-care are an issue in medical education too. The rates of burnout, and even, I haven't the figures with me there, but depression and anxiety are really high for medical students. And the next issue is that there are a lot more barriers than only the stigma one, because the same healthcare system in which you're trained is the healthcare system that is supposed to treat your problems, and that's often a barrier why medical students don't seek help. And I think all of us here can every now and then have a look whether we really serve the 7 pillars of self-care and are really into looking after us. Okay, so coming from the what, the big question that remains is, why are we doing that? And actually the answer is, I think, pretty easy. It's because medical education is personal. There was a really nice study. It's called Innovation in Early Medical Education, No Bells or Whistles Required. And what they did was they had quite an elaborative curriculum already, but they decided to have a bit more fancy stuff. So they introduced new concepts and sessions and then asked students what they enjoyed and why. And you know what? In the end, the race was not won by, let's say, video game or the simulated knee injection. No, it was the live patient encounters. So meeting a person face to face, being the physician of this person, was the one important thing. And so as such, medical education of the future won't be that different from medical education of the past and the present, as it is personal. And only if you take it personally, you can do it right. So, not only personal because, and that's an important aspect, the students of today will most likely be at the peak of their career when people like me are so old that we need the doctors to treat our diseases, but also because it is such a privilege that people are coming, they are talking about their stories, they are sharing their fears, and they are trusting us up to their lives, that it's our responsibility to make the most of it. So please, you all, take medical education personally. Try to shape the future of medical education, because it is here, it is now, and it is you. And with that, I want to finish with the vision that my institute has, saying better medical education for better healthcare. Thanks for listening.
So, Anne, thank you very much for these statements, thoughts, ideas, data. It was really interesting. So now I would like to hand over the microphone to Luciano Sasso and Francesco Panese.
Thank you very much, Bernard and Stefan. Really very interesting session. Thank you to all the speakers. Really, it was fascinating to listen to you. So now we have, unfortunately, only 15 minutes for the discussion. There are many things to say, and really the time is not very much. Maybe from my point of view, I would like to start a bit as a general comment based on the last presentation that was really fascinating by Anne. I think it's really interesting the way that medical education is evolving and proceeding. I would add one element from my point of view that maybe was not considered, is also to increase the contents in ethics and philosophy in the humanities, I think, in medical education, because this is proven to be very important to develop empathy in medical students, in medical doctors later on. And this is something that more and more, in my view, will be important, because as it was said in the beginning, I mean, artificial intelligence is going very fast. Medical doctors will use this help from artificial intelligence algorithm to basically, make better diagnosis, etc. But there are some elements that really belong to humans as such that I think we should take care of and to try to develop and trying to also to remove, I think one big challenge we have in our faculties is that we can not add on top of the curricular things. We need to have the courage also to remove something, because otherwise there is no time, and these kids are under pressure. They go, it was impressive, the data, 37% burnout is very high, also due to the workload they have and study and work and do things in the hospital. So we need to have the courage to remove something and add something else. And from my point of view, even if also I'm not a medical doctor myself, I'm for the pharmaceutical sector, I think we need to remove something and leave space for something else. So the digital skills, again, social sciences and humanities in the curricula should find space in the curriculum, removing some technical. So just a small comment, and then we open the discussion.
Yeah, I have a small comment too. I think that, so first of all, thank you very much, dear colleagues, for these short talks. And I think that taking these talks together, that illustrates the spirit of our hub. Why? Norbert Schmidt mentioned the theme of epigenetics. So epigenetics, as you probably know, is the modulation of the expression of the genome, and this modulation came from outside. And Mauricio Avendano underlined the fact that a lot of no medical things modulate health. For example, public transport or public or health policies. And this is really interesting. Why? Because to catch this kind of phenomena, we need artificial intelligence or big data analysis to create populational evidences about the modulation of the health of the population. And this kind of, I would say, integrative approach of medicine, or more than that, integrative approach of health, must percolate into the training of the future doctors and not only doctors but all the health professionals. And this has been quite well illustrated by our colleague Anne Hermann Werner, because now we must teach to the students to integrate not only the complexity, but because complexity is just the word, but to develop tools to be aware about the multiple modulators of health and health trajectories of people we are, I would say. And I'm sure that maybe, but it is maybe, I'm not sure, but I'll try. Maybe the digital could help us. Maybe in the future we could use more and more simulations about population-based data. And I'm sure that this kind of new techniques will improve, of course, the training of the next professionals. But I think that will not be only more technicians, but they will share a more broader conception of health. And I think that this broader conception of health is at the center of our hub, the Hub 3, I think.
Maybe we can ask if there are questions for the speakers. I'm sure there are so many interesting topics that were presented. Is there anyone who would like to start and break the ice? There is a question here. Would you like to read it?
Nächste Frage von selber Person. So eine andere Frage. Fantastic insights about the importance of entertainment and interactivity for teaching success. Could you imagine future formats on public streaming platforms such as YouTube or Twitch? I am sure that there might be some data privacy issues which would need to be solved first. Do you see any other obstacle for such a goal? Maybe it's a question for you, Bernard.
Thank you very much. It's a good question, actually, because we always have to take care about personal issues. And of course, data security is a very, very big issue. And quite often, it disturbs us in getting into the broad field. However, it is definitely necessary. And we, by ourselves, experienced that during education, because we show surgical approaches on human donors, on anatomical specimen. And we do not like to show these pictures at YouTube, so we had to create our own platform. And so we designed a novel platform, which is with a password, security, and you have to register. So it is a professional closed job we are doing, and it is quite often necessary in our field. So there are some examples where people started to deal with medical education or something they describe as medical education, and they went to the public quite often together with commercialization. If you think about the exhibition Körperwelten, for instance, and this has nothing to do with academic education. this is something in between, I have no idea, but this is nothing academic institutions should do, and we have to be very precise and careful, I think.
Question from the audience? Maybe, yeah, please, there is one there. Please, if you can say your name.
Where are there mics in the room? Or?
Just come to the...
Yeah, you can come over there.
Yes, hello. My name is Monica and I come from Stockholm University. And I actually took a CIVIS course at the University of Madrid in September about shared decision making. I also did a workshop there because I work with hackathons, and we were discussing with surgeon doctors and resident students how to make technology more accessible. And the discussions led us to the fact that one thing is language. And you mentioned in your projects that you currently provide, for example, in the Sectio Chirurgica in English and German. So how do you see the challenge of making it in Spanish, for example, Swedish, etc.? I think that's a really interesting challenge to scaling such solutions that already proven to be very interactive, very in need, in demand. And another thing, how do you see this question of private versus public investments when it comes to implemented solutions, not only in one hospital, not only in one country, but throughout Europe, for example?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So if we speak about language, Carsten, perhaps you can give some answers. However, just a very brief explanation how we did the translation. The Sectio Chirurgica is driven by students. That means we have native-speaking students from just different countries in our faculty. So we asked them not to do a simultaneous translation, but to do it like in a soccer moderation. So they tell and say, well, the surgeon, not the soccer player, the surgeon is coming from the right now, and you see in his left arm, and so on. And now he is explaining, and this makes it more, well, students driven and quite easy for us to do that. However, there are some novel tools for simultaneous translations that might help, and there Carsten can give an explanation.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a great question, and I think translation for, as long as we talk about national languages, and especially the big ones, that's a somewhat solved issue. I think we can sort of on the spot translate into all the major languages. Interesting challenges arise when you are talking dialects, ancient heritage languages. So I come from a part of Germany that speaks Plattdeutsch, so my grandma wouldn't speak German, for example, right? And that's when you start disenfranchising people again, because there's not going to be a machine translation system for those smaller fringe languages. For all the major stuff, we can do this out of the box.
We come to you then, thank you.
Please do, yeah.
And the second question, just to, is very, very important, and it is going into the heart of academia, actually, because we always have to think about how companies, for instance, can help without influencing the free world of academia. And there needs to be some rules, and these rules needs to be harmonized within different countries. And I have the feeling that this is a topic that also could and should be addressed in the CIVIS Alliance, because there might be some different statements, habits, ideas, how to deal with that. So it's a very important discussion we should start, in my opinion.
Other questions or comments?
Professor Sasso, you made some important remarks about clearing up the medical curriculum. And I think traditionally the medical curriculum is mainly about acquiring knowledge. And in the last decades, we added more skills, for example, so skills that were before that mostly taught during medical residency or fellowship and so on. And now we're going to outsource our knowledge more and more. We have all these intelligent IT systems like ChatGPT or more traditionally like electronic textbooks like UpToDate and so on that provide us specialist knowledge within minutes or maybe seconds in the future. So I think for me it's an important question, how much knowledge does a medical doctor of the future really have to have, and how much might be outsourced so that we take it for granted that we use computer systems, for example, to get the knowledge immediately. So like we now look up Wikipedia, for example. So you don't have to learn historical numbers, when was King so-and-so born, you just look it up. And on the other hand, we have to free up some space just to concentrate more on these other more complex skills that cannot be replaced by computers. But I'm still a little bit lost, how to moderate this process. And because when you sit in some sessions and so you see, okay, the pharmacologist would say every student has to learn this, and the internist says, of course, every has to know every rheumatologic disease and so on. So it's very difficult really to say, okay, they don't have to learn this, and we cut this down to a core curriculum. Do you have an idea how to moderate this process?
Thank you. It's a very important question. Stefan maybe wants to say something. It's really difficult to answer. But I was thinking, I like the 6 principles that Anna presented. They were very nice. The one in which you say you have to learn and then you have to learn again after some time. Why maybe we need that? Because you need to forget something. You learn, you forget. What remains is more yours than very often you forget the details. So in my view, we need to admit that we cannot know everything, that we will forget many details. So in the end, the role of universities, the role of professors is to give the frames, not anymore like before to give all the details, because it's something that, again, the details are becoming too many. It was mentioned PubMed, 35 million, I think now, abstracts. We are talking about the full articles. You have to multiply by 10 or 15. So we are talking about 500 million pages of things. Nobody knows that. So, but if you know the frames, if you know where to look up things, then you can find them. So this, I think, is very important. And also, we have to be careful with the effect that on humans too much information has. There is an inhibitory effect. If I go to a library, it's a beautiful library with 1,000 books. Maybe I will go out of the library without reading anything. If maybe I found a book on in an hotel, you are there and then you find a book next to your bed. Sometimes, you are there, you will read half of the book because you have that book there, and maybe you're spending a vacation. So there is a thing that I think we still are not taking into consideration. Machines will not be able to, help us completely about that. We are still humans. There are some mechanisms that are very important to understand.
As you know, we are debating a lot about this question, but just to add 2 aspects. One aspect is sometimes we are forgetting that over the last 3 years we had a very specific situation with COVID, where on one hand, and that was a very interesting finding, that our students were very successful regarding the cognitive knowledge they reproduce. So also coming back to the rankings, Tübingen students particularly, they were #1 in the national exams. So that was not the problem. However, if we ask the alumni, and we are doing that, as you know, on a regular basis, and if we ask them what was good and what was perhaps missing out in the studies, then it's always the transfer from the theoretical knowledge to the practical skills. And my particular concern is that patient encounters are reduced, as you know, as a clinician, were dramatically reduced over the last 3 years. So what we really have to do is to bring back students in patient physician encounters and learning them how to get all the skills you need in a clinical setting. And that's one of the issues where, you know, we try to retrain our students, but that's, in my view, the hardest thing at the moment, coming back to the bad or the practice-based teaching and learning situations.
And maybe a word, because your question is really good. So I'm not a medical doctor, but maybe one answer could be found in Aristotle, in the Ethica Nicomache. So for Aristotle, the medical doctor is a prudential guy. And the ability of the prudential guy is the ability to connect the knowledge with specific situations. So maybe one thing which will not disappear of the curricula will be the clinic, I guess. And maybe we will have more and more training about the skills to adapt knowledge which is quite easy to find with specific cases. So this is, I think it could be possible in the next years to have this kind of change. And maybe we have to reread Aristotle. Yes, please.
I just have a quick question that was just inspired by the mention of COVID, which it's not mentioned as much as I thought it would. But when it happened, I just view that in Ireland anyway, there was this tremendous increase in trust in the medical profession and science for a while. And then, of course, we can see what's happened ever since, the demonization of Fauci in America. And I was also listening to DeSantis's launch on Twitter, very problematic launch last night. And again, the same thing, a demonization of scientists and medical professionals. The question is it getting worse, this polarization? If so, what can be done to address it? And thirdly, what responsibilities would the future medical students, medicine institution itself have to do without getting further burnt out?
It's a question for Dean, no?
Yeah.
Okay. I have not a quick answer to your question, but and that's not the answer perhaps to your question. But what I think might help is time to reflect and finding room for reflection, as we also heard in Anna's talk. And what we try also to find in our curriculum ways to reflect on the basis of the teachers, on the basis of the students, and also involve patients in that reflection, because I think that's one of the most important source for us. And not forget that at least most of us are physicians and we want to treat and help patients.
So I think, unfortunately, this is a fascinating topic, but we need to close. There is another session after the coffee break. I think just one word to say that it's very difficult to foresee the future of medicine, but for sure this kind of discussions within CIVIS are very useful, because we have 11 universities in Europe, we have 5 partners in Africa, we have a lot of young people involved. One of the hubs is dedicated to health, not to medicine, but to health in general, with this very strong attention to the social sciences, to the interdisciplinarity of training, of learning. And so this we feel that is very important. 3, universities in CIVIS do not have a medical faculty, actually, and this is also very important for us, again, to have this discussion, including all aspects. So I encourage, the young people to continue to follow us. We will have other sessions like this in the future. Many thanks to Stefan Zippel, to Bernard Hirt, and to all of you for being with us, also the people online. Thank you to Franco for co-chair, this hub with me, and again, looking forward to many activities under CIVIS. Thank you. And thank you to the speakers, of course. Yes.